Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He also sits on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. Dr. Gottlieb, it's great to see you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Let's first talk about this Pfizer-BioNTech news. How long would this regulatory review generally take, and what could that mean for when that particular vaccine could hit the market if approved?
Well, look, I think when you look at all the vaccines, the good news is, and the news that we've had this week, is that the trials are enrolling pretty well. Pfizer announced yesterday that they've enrolled 11,000 patients in their trial in the first 3 weeks. Moderna said they've enrolled 8,000 patients, both at 30,000 patient clinical trials. AstraZeneca, which also has a vaccine under development, has a 10,000 patient clinical trial underway in the United Kingdom, and they've enrolled about 8,000 patients. So these trials are progressing well. And if the vaccines are effective, you could get a readout as early as October if the trials continue to enroll very well. If the vaccines are a little less effective, it might take longer to get a readout in these trials. So the rule of thumb is that if they're about 70-80% effective at reducing the severity of symptoms or preventing disease, you might get a result in October. If they're about 50 or 60% effective, and these are rough numbers, it might take until November that you get a readout from these trials and you get a positive signal. So it's going to depend a lot on how effective these vaccines are when you start to get a signal out of these clinical trials.
And then there is the announcement from J&J that they plan to enroll 60,000 patients in their late-stage trial. I know you've said that that could perhaps allow J&J to draw conclusions more quickly or access global markets more quickly. But fast forward to January. Let's say that there are multiple of these vaccines as part of Operation Warp Speed. How will consumers decide which one of these vaccines to get? How will insurers decide which of these vaccines to cover?
Yeah, it's a little bit different than the flu vaccine in that there's a number of flu vaccine manufacturers, but we really generally don't think about which vaccine we're taking. There is some differentiation in the market. There's high-dose vaccines that are used by older people. Generally, there are vaccines that can be taken intranasally. The flu-mist vaccine that's used by a younger population, so you can avoid the injection. But generally, we don't think about the vaccines that differently because they're largely interchangeable. There may be more differentiation in this market. There may be certain vaccines that are more tailored to certain populations, but that's not something that we're going to know yet. We're going to have to see how the clinical data shakes out. But we really need more than one of these manufacturers to be successful in order to supply the market effectively, and I think a hedge against any unseen risks. You really want more than one manufacturer to make it across the finish line. Right now, the three manufacturers that are the furthest ahead are AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Moderna. So hopefully all three can make it onto the market and have successful trials. I think that would put us in a very good position to have supply sufficient to vaccinate the population at some point in 2021. In 2020, we're really looking at the possibility that a vaccine could be available, but available for probably a very select population and under some kind of protocol where you're still continuing to collect information about its safety and effectiveness.
Gottlieb, how concerned are you by certain polls that suggest people's desire to get vaccinated might not be as high as some people would expect? How high does it have to be for it to be effective across the entire population?
Well, look, I think it's concerning generally because we see more and more skepticism about vaccines. And these are one of the greatest public health advances that we've had in modern times. You see skepticism about the flu vaccine and a whole host of vaccines. Generally, about 40% of the population gets vaccinated for flu. That's way too low. It's clusters around very young people, kids, and older people. But people who are sort of middle-aged or young adults generally don't get vaccinated at high rates. Some of the survey data looking at whether people would get vaccinated for coronavirus clusters around the same amount. You're seeing surveys that show 40 to 60%. The vaccines, when they come to market, aren't going to be indicated for kids. And I think an older population where coronavirus has been particularly troubling and caused a lot of death and disease, they're likely to be more motivated to go out and get vaccinated. But if you can get 40% of the population vaccinated, that's a pretty good number. It's not great. You'd like to see it higher, but it's pretty good considering that by the time the vaccines really come on the market for broad availability, probably 30% of the U.S. population will have had coronavirus and already have some immunity from prior exposure. So you layer on to that vaccinating 40% of the population, you're getting to a level of immunity and exposure and some level of immunity that should be effective at stopping the widespread propagation of this disease.